I'm curious. I am curious. Curious
by nature.
Welcome to Curious by Nature. I'm Jessica Johnson from Newswise. Coming close to death and surviving can have a profound impact on one's life. However, some people have near-death experiences, which have even greater effects. What's happening during a near-death experience from a scientific perspective? This next guest has been collecting stories of near-death experiences and conducting studies on the phenomenon for several decades at the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies. Dr. Greyson, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Dr. Bruce Greyson. I'm the Chester Carlson Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences at the University of Virginia.
There are many interviews about you and podcasts. Recently, there was one from Jim Ryan, the president of UVA.
Right.
And so there are many places that people can listen to interviews about more details of your work, and they can read your book after, which I read and reread, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so I was wondering if you, though, could tell me what you do briefly, just in case people aren't aware.
Well, for the past half century, I've been studying near-death experiences, which means primarily interviewing people who have had near-death experiences and then testing various hypotheses that may explain why or how they happen and how they affect people's lives. I will add that the University of Virginia has been a center for near-death research since the 1970s when Raymond Moody was here and started the field. And we've been pioneers in the field ever since with Ian Stevenson, Emily Kelly, Marietta Pilanova, and myself.
Can you define what a near-death experience is?
It's a profound experience that many people have when they come close to death or sometimes when they're pronounced dead that includes phenomena that are sometimes considered spiritual, things like a sense of leaving the body, encountering other entities that aren't physical entities, including deceased loved ones sometimes, reviewing your entire life, and having an overwhelming sense of peace and well-being, although you know or you think that you are dying.
And can you tell me more information about recent research that you have published or that you have worked on or that you think might be important in your field?
In recent years, I've been turning more and more of my attention to helping the people who have had near-death experiences. Often they come back to what's considered the normal world and have difficulty reconciling their new attitudes and beliefs about the universe with everyday life. So we've been doing research on near-death experiences who feel they need some help coming back. We're looking at what things they feel they need help with, what types of help they seek, and what types of help they feel is helpful or not helpful. We're also looking at healthcare workers, doctors and nurses, and asking them about how they feel about near-death experiences, whether they feel competent to ask people and to talk with people about these experiences. And if not, what are the barriers to helping them do that? And then we're finally going to develop a training program to help people understand how to deal with these experiences.
Those people who have experienced near-death experience or experiencers, is that what you call them?
Yes, experiencers.
What have you found that they come out of that with that they need help with or that they would like to happen after their near-death experience?
Often people come back from a near-death experience with changed attitudes and values. They tend to become much more spiritual, much less materialistic, much more concerned about people and relationships rather than things. It may or may not be disturbing to them based on what their life was like beforehand, but it can mean changes in relationships, changes in careers, which can be quite difficult to deal with. Furthermore, people often feel they have after effects of the experience that are hard for them to deal with. They sometimes feel increased empathy with other people that can be inappropriate in certain social settings, and they have trouble dealing with these things.
And what about the healthcare providers? What have you seen in terms of the maybe conclusions from your research or next steps that you would like to study?
Right. Well, we've surveyed about 600 people, physicians who work at the University of Virginia, about what they think are the barriers to them being able to communicate with their patients about near-death experiences. And to our delight, very few of them said that they didn't think it was worth talking about it, or they didn't think it was a meaningful experience. Most of them said things like, I don't know enough about the experience to be able to counsel patients about it, and I don't have enough time in my practice to go into these things with my patients.
With your study of near-death experiences and your experience hearing about near-death experiences, in your book, you've said that you've gained a lot of insight and benefits from that without having to have had a near-death experience. But are there things that you feel like you haven't been able to get by not having one?
There are certainly things that near-death experiencers have that I don't have. Whether I wish I had them again or not is a difficult thing to answer. Most near-death experiencers feel that the barriers between themselves and other people have come down, and they feel one with everyone, not just people, but animals, the natural world. Being a person in a physical body, I kind of like being separate in some ways, having barriers between myself and others. So I don't have that sense of oneness with everything that near-death experiencers do. And often I'm happy with that.
Do you mind if I ask what your spiritual background is?
I really didn't have one before I started this research. I grew up in a materialistic household. My father was a chemist, and, what you see is what you get. And when I started encountering near-death experiences and encountered phenomena that I couldn't seem to explain in terms of a materialistic model, I started becoming more doubtful about this materialistic world that I was living in. Now, I don't know exactly how to describe what my beliefs are, but I definitely feel like there's a part of us that's not physical, that's spiritual, if you will, that goes beyond the physical body.
September is National Suicide Prevention Month. Can you tell me more about if there was something specific? Because in your book, you did go into this a little bit,
Right.
that was related to people who had tried or attempted suicide. And is there something unique from those NDEs?
One of the most consistent things people say after a near-death experience is that they've lost their fear of death and dying. They no longer feel like death is something to be afraid of. And as a psychiatrist, I was concerned when I heard that, because I had worked with a lot of people who were thinking about taking their lives, but were deterred from that because they were afraid something bad would happen if they killed themselves. And here we have near-death experiences say, nothing's going to happen, it's great. So I was concerned this is going to make people more suicidal. So I did some research on people who made suicide attempts and then had a near-death experience as a result of that attempt. I found to my surprise that they became much less suicidal than suicide attempters who did not have NDEs. And that was kind of puzzling to me, so I asked them to explain that to me. And they said things like, when you become less afraid of dying, you become less afraid of living, because you're not afraid of taking risks. What's the worst that can happen? You die. And they also feel that they came back with a new love of the world, and they have the same problems they had before they attempted suicide, but they see them in a different light. They no longer think of themselves as just what's in this bag of skin, but as something greater than themselves. And the problems they had are no longer things to be run away from, but things they're supposed to struggle with and learn from and grow from.
And what is the idea of this fear of death? When people say that they have a fear of death, is it the specific moment that you found that they were afraid of that moment of dying, or what maybe sometimes people see in the near-death experiences, or the effects of dying? What would you say is involved in that larger fear?
Right. Well, what they're no longer afraid of is the state of being dead. They don't feel that's the end of everything, that consciousness goes on, and that the state of your consciousness after death is, for most people, a blissful state. Even those who have an unpleasant near-death experiences, and there are a few, they come back saying, I'm not afraid anymore, because I've been there, I know what it's like, I know how to retool my life so that I won't end up in an unpleasant way after that. However, even though they're not afraid of death, they are concerned about the process of dying, particularly if it's a long, drawn-out, and painful one.
Can you tell me maybe one story that for you maybe is most memorable? Maybe it wasn't even in the book after.
Well, I put most of the most memorable ones in the book, but new ones every day.
Yeah.
But the things that I find most challenging to understand myself are the things that challenge our ideas of mind and brain. We're taught in college and medical school that the mind and the brain are the same thing, and all your thoughts are created by the brain. And yet we have this experience that many people say is the most elaborate and vivid experience of their lives when the brain is shutting down or in some cases not functioning at all. So that kind of makes it hard to explain. How does the brain create thoughts if thoughts are going better than ever when the brain is not functioning? We have people who claim to leave their bodies in a near-death experience and are able to accurately report seeing things that they shouldn't have been able to see when they were unconscious and eyes were closed and so forth. We also have people who encounter deceased loved ones in the near-death experience who they hadn't known had died yet. Many people say, oh, yes, I saw Aunt so-and-so, and that can be dismissed as just being wishful thinking. But when you didn't know the person was dead, that becomes harder to just dismiss. And we have lots of good examples of that. Actually, some going back to the 1st century, by Pliny the Elder wrote a couple of these. But we have some very, very well documented ones from recent years where people have encountered and interacted with deceased people that they didn't know had died.
So what would you say is in the future of NDE research?
One of the most exciting things that's going on in near-death research now is a lot of neurophysiological research into what happens during the experience, looking at the brain correlates of the experience. I should say that this doesn't explain why the experience happens, but it may help us understand how they happen, or at least how the brain processes them when you come back into the body.
And how is that done? I mean, how often do NDEs occur in certain states when someone is near death?
About 20% of people who have a documented cardiac arrest will describe a near-death experience. Almost none of those are having their brains monitored when they go through this. It's a very rare accident when that happens. People would like to be able to monitor the brain while someone's going through a cardiac arrest, but it hasn't really been done yet. Sam Parnia at New York University is trying some research in this area yet, but it's extremely difficult when you're a resuscitating person to get brain measurements as well. So it hasn't happened yet, but people are looking at other states that are in some ways comparable to near-death experiences, like psychedelic trips, and looking at what's going on in the brain during those states. And can we, by analogy, assume that some of that is going on in a near-death experience?
In history, has anyone tried to induce a near-death experience? I assume that it's not ethical to do that in terms of a real, a research study, but...
Well, you're right. We couldn't get a hospital ethics committee to approve that.
Yeah.
But there have been reports of it over the years. There's a story about Bishop Berkeley who hanged himself. And there's some suggestion that he did this as a way to try to induce a near-death experience because he had heard about them, had read about them, and was trying to see for himself what that was like. People have more recently tried to induce something like a near-death experience, either by psychedelic drugs or by hypnosis and guided imagery. And it's questionable whether they really achieve something that's like a near-death experience or not. I should say that the ancient Greek and Egyptian mystery religions often tried to induce near-death experiences. For example, with the Egyptians, they buried people actually for several days and then dug them up. And those who survived often talked about near-death experiences.
And what did the ancient Greeks do? The same thing?
Yes, pretty much the same thing. They often use drugs and vapors to try to put people into a near-death state.
And so what would you ideally like the media to think about when covering near-death experiences or other research that's done around consciousness?
I would like the media not to dismiss them as being meaningless hallucinations. They are definitely not that. As a psychiatrist, I've dealt with hallucinations for 50 years now. and they don't produce the profound and long-lasting after effects that near-death experiences do. These are very, very intense experiences that people never get over. They don't want to get over. So I think I'd like the media to take them seriously and consider the different possibilities that may, quote, explain them, but more importantly, look at the impressive after effects people have as a result of having these experiences.
Are there any questions that I haven't asked you that you would like to answer?
I think you've done a wonderful job, Jessica.
Thank you.
Curious by Nature is a production of Newswise. More than 7,000 journalists get the Newswise wires. Visit newswise.com and find out how to spread your news today.